Hello, welcome back to Am I Neurodivergent, recapping my unexpected autism and ADHD year. Chapter 27, week 27 of my journey was all about PDA, Pathological Demand Avoidance. I went deep down a rabbit hole with this, so if you're not interested in PDA, this is not the chapter for you. If you are interested in PDA, there's a ton of other videos and entire channels dedicated to this. For me, it ultimately ended up being a bit of a diversion, but I'm trying to track my discovery year broadly as it went, and finding out about this, whether I ultimately fit a PDA profile or not, was a significant part of my discovery journey, because it's when I think I understood properly for the first time the concept of different subtypes or profiles of autism that can externally present really quite differently to what would traditionally be considered an autistic presentation. I mean, there's not really any such thing as a traditional autistic presentation. That much is becoming abundantly clear. But PDAers really are somehow quite different to quite different, if that makes sense. And that also makes PDA quite a contentious topic for some people in the autism sphere, which we'll get on to, between people who think PDA is 100% definitely a subtype of autism, that it's a specific profile of autism, which is how it's currently regarded in the UK, by the way. There are also people who think PDA should be an entirely different diagnosis to autism, which it kind of was previously. And there are also people who think PDA profile is just not a thing at all, or that it's simply just the result of the combination of autism with other co-occurring conditions such as ADHD or underlying personality traits. Caveat for this episode, much like another of my videos on a controversial topic, my ASD versus Asperger's video, I don't really have a particular dog in this fight. There's not a particular angle or viewpoint on PDA I'm pushing here. I'm just very interested in the PDA profile as a still relatively recently diagnosed neurodivergent individual. I've scored high on self-tests for a PDA profile. Some of the most relatable stuff I see online is from PDA pages. But I was basically steered away from going down a PDA path, and then very quickly after hyperfixating on a PDA profile for a brief period of time, I had multiple professionals tell me I clearly had co-occurring ADHD alongside my autism. So I kind of veered heavily onto that and just kind of dropped the PDA thing. It's been really interesting going back through my journals to prep for this video, because all of my notes from this time were pretty much, OMG, I totally have PDA, this is me, I've 100% found my tribe. Then I basically just dropped it just as quickly after the ADHD thing showed up. So it's been really interesting revisiting this rabbit hole, because so much of it still remains relatable, and it might be a rabbit hole I re-explore again going forward. Anyway, the reason PDA landed in my consciousness this week in the journey, June 2022, was that I attended the annual Autism show at the XL in London. It turns out the autism show is quite a big thing here in the UK. It was, in a lot of ways, quite an overwhelming experience. There was such a variety of autistic voices and literature and stalls and groups and apps, like all autistic life was here. I attended a ton of talks over a couple of days and was just in full-on sponge mode, learning as much as I could and listening to as many different lived experiences as I could. You get noise cancelling headphones and just hover nearby and tune into the channel for any of the talks you're interested in, and I learned a bunch about all sorts of things. But by far my biggest takeaway from the autism show was PDA. 6 months in for me, the autism show was the first time I'd even heard of PDA, and I spent a good whack of my time at the event sitting on the sidelines, Googling PDA, doing online PDA tests, scoring high and thinking, yes, this is it. This is the reason I've never felt like a straight up autism profile 100% fitted me. Because as much as I'd recognized everything I was reading and learning about autism, and it explained so much of the internal challenges I'd always felt, there was always a voice saying that while I definitely recognized and related to the autism, it still felt like there was something else going on with me too. And I think PDA appeared on my radar like a beacon when I was actively looking for that what else. And I grabbed at it. It was a really interesting diversion, and a year and a bit on, like I said, I still haven't 100% ruled it out. I got distracted by other things. Anyway, basics for the sake of completeness. What is PDA? The National Autistic Society website says pathological demand avoidance is a profile of autism that describes people whose main characteristic is to avoid everyday demands and expectations to an extreme extent. The term was first coined by Professor Elizabeth Newson in the 1980s under the umbrella of pervasive developmental disorder, and it was first mentioned in the British Medical Journal back in 2003. What used to be PDD is now diagnostically it all falls under autism spectrum disorder in diagnostic criteria, but the PDA profile and where it fits into the autism spectrum remains widely debated and not universally accepted, although where it is, a broadly acknowledged definition is where people are driven to avoid everyday demands and expectations to an extreme extent, often but not always accompanied by high levels of anxiety. PDA is also sometimes referred to as EDA, extreme demand avoidance, or keeping the PDA acronym, persistent drive for autonomy, which is a term a lot of PDAers actively prefer over pathological demand avoidance. The primary reason it can be such a controversial topic and why there's a resistance in some quarters to having it be a diagnosis on its own terms is essentially because there's a really broad spectrum of demand avoidance, most of which is not remotely unique to those with a PDA profile. In fact, it's almost a given for any neurodivergent person to a greater or lesser degree to struggle with demand avoidance. But those with specific PDA profiles or who strongly self-identify with PDA profiles will damn near fight to the death to insist that a PDA profile is a unique and distinct profile all of its own. And features of a PDA profile, as it's developed over time, incorporate way, way more than simple demand avoidance, hence why a lot of people prefer a persistent drive for autonomy. And a PDA profile can definitely be quote-unquote atypical for what's broadly thought of as typical autistic traits. Atypicals, if that makes any semblance of sense. What's meant by that? For example, someone who meets the criteria for a PDA profile will generally appear to have a better social understanding and better communication skills than most other autistic people, and will often use these social and communication skills to their advantage. This doesn't mean they don't have difficulties processing and understanding communication in social situations, but it means they can be uncommonly good at masking those difficulties to give the appearance of being socially adept. According to the NAS, the PDA Society, and other descriptors, and I'll link to those pages in the description, distinctive features of a PDA profile include resisting and avoiding the ordinary demands of life, using social strategies such as distracting or making excuses to enable that avoidance, being able to appear sociable, for example, maintaining eye contact and easy conversation, while still lacking the full underlying understanding of social skills, being actively comfortable in role play and pretense, enjoying the act of masking, essentially, rather than feeling horrified and pressured by it, having a sense of humour, often quite a dark sense of humour, And this was at the time key to me as an individual briefly latching on to PDA. The common descriptions of autistic people struggling with humour has always stuck in my throat a little bit and contributed to that inward-facing imposter syndrome of, am I even autistic? Have I been somehow misdiagnosed twice? Like, I'm funny, damn it, and I get humour. Not in these videos, to be fair. I know I can be a bit overly earnest and flat in these, in my defence. It's really weird talking to a laptop screen with no one on the other end of it. But in real life, people do tell me I'm funny. I've even got the well-meaning, but you can't be autistic, you're funny thing on more than one occasion. Anyway, what else for a PDA profile? Experiencing excessive mood swings and impulsivity, displaying hyperfixated or obsessive behaviour, often focused on other people, and a desire to be in control of situations and dictate what's happening. When PDAers feel secure and in control of a situation, they can present themselves as confident and engaging. But when out of their comfort zone or feeling excessively anxious, their presentations can become controlling or dominating. And neither of these presentations are particularly, quote unquote, autistic. And as a result, PDA profiles can often be mistaken or misdiagnosed as things like borderline personality disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar, depression, or narcissistic personality disorder. But despite its more assured, confident outward presentation, it is an autism profile, at least in the UK. And it's a hidden disability that requires support and empathy, just like all other autism spectrum presentations. The NAS site signposted me to two fantastic pages on PDA, and again, I'll link these in the description. And those were Sally Cat PDA and Rico Ryuki's PDA blog. Sally Cat in particular has a blog from April 2022 called Internalized PDA, the quieter but equally impactful presentation of PDA that's hard for people to spot, that talks about the already as is limited amount of research on PDA being focused on externalized versions of PDA, including anger and meltdowns, whereas internalized PDA conceals meltdowns and avoids demands more subtly, but leaves the individual in just as much anguish over the stress those demands create. Whether externalizing or internalizing PDAers, demands can lead to self-harm, dropping out of school or employment, and suicidal ideation. She does this absolutely fantastic guided tour of the PDA continent, which I'd advise anyone curious to read. There's also an animated version of this blog on YouTube, which I hadn't realised previously before looking back into it, which I'll link to in the description as well. I won't do this justice. You should definitely read the original, but to recap, she takes an aerial view of this PDA continent and talks about the great quicksand of demand avoidance that covers a huge area. If you get trapped in it, it's very hard to move at all. There's the icy cliffs of anxiety, which to get past you have to follow a narrow slippery path at the top of a precipice with a 1,000-metre drop below onto jagged ice splinters, and people often freeze here, unable to move at all. There's the unpredictable volcanic ridge of fiery emotions, the precarious boulders of control need, the misty margins of fantasy and roleplay, the high-walled village of social focus, and the temple of people obsession. She then lands the plane and takes us through the deep hidden forest of internalized PDA, which reveals intuitive or positive masking. Intuitive or positive masking creates successful outcomes, which she classes as very different to forced autistic masking. PDAers often feel confused when autistic people talk about dropping their masks, because for PDAers, doing so feels neither possible nor even desirable. Masking feels natural and automatic for PDAers. Internalized meltdowns can be confusing for outside observers because they don't look anything like what people broadly consider meltdowns to be, namely out of control, loud, or possibly violent. Meltdowns for internalized PDA are no less intense, but they're choked inside. She describes it as like a swallowed firework that can come out as a barrage of awkward, mean accusations, or as being irrational and difficult and arguing with everything, or as self-harming. Internalized meltdowns don't trouble observers, but they cause huge trouble and pain to the people experiencing them. They can alienate those closest to them, saying horrible, nasty things for no apparent reason. And Sally Cat describes her own meltdowns as truly horrible experiences that she hates and can feel like a demon's possessed her and gained access to her memory bank, so that she can't stop that demon saying hurtful things to the people she loves, and she has to observe being dredged up to inflict maximum emotional damage that leads immediately afterwards into self-hatred and shame for doing it. And she describes the question of what's wrong with me plaguing her life, struggling with depression, substance abuse, self-esteem, being unable to hold down jobs, being unable to keep her home clean, struggling with personal hygiene, obsessing over potential partners, then driving them away, struggling to maintain friendships, until she discovered neurodivergence and autism as the thing that answered those questions. She also describes other things like pretending to play as a child in the middle of other kids, but not really interacting with them at all. And I did this. I did a thing called chips in the playground, where I'd pretend to be on a police motorbike and zip in and out of all the other kids playing around me. But it was just me doing my little kid thing on my own, because I knew instinctively it was weird to stand in the corner looking terrified. So I just tried what I could to be normal. She also talks about selective mutism, where kids will be silent in some situations where they're very anxious, like at school, but excessively chatty at home. And finally, she adds a couple of new F responses to fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and those are fib, like panic lying as an anxiety response when you feel trapped, rejected, or uninteresting, and funster, so flipping into manic, hysterical clown mode, dealing with extreme social anxiety by becoming the center of attention and acting like a clown. And I definitely did both of these things as a kid. Riko Ryuki's blog has a lot of stuff I related to as well. For example, the constant conflict between autism and PDA, which is expressed as the autistic part of me craves routine, the PDA part of me hates it. As a result, I only like routines I have chosen. I sometimes feel like I'm splitting myself in half, end quote. Honestly, a lot of this stuff in retrospect is the exact way having co-occurring autism and ADHD can be described, but I'm not going to be one of those people minimizing PDAers' experience and identity by saying maybe it's not this, guys, maybe it's this. People know what their own lived experience is, and Sally Cat in particular has done stuff saying ADHD style demand avoidance is not the same as PDA demand avoidance. Anyway, that aside, reading all of this was absolutely fascinating, and a lot of it was landing for me. I did the unofficial PDA self-test that Sally Cat and Riko developed, and again I'll link that test in the description if people are curious to do it themselves. And I scored high. I was on the cusp of likely and the highest, very likely to be PDA. So yeah, there I was, little freshly minted 40-year-old autistic kid at the autism show, now thinking I've definitely got PDA. The PDA test, by the way, has questions like, let me just whiz through some of them. Do you find it hard to do simple things other people seem to find easy? Does praise make you feel good or uneasy? Do you find tasks you have to do harder than optional tasks? Do you find it harder to do tasks when people are watching you? Do you feel a need to take control but dislike being placed in charge? Do you find it helpful or unhelpful if someone reminds you to do a task? Do you dislike routines that have been imposed on you? Do you avoid routine tasks like washing, eating, dressing, sleeping, and going out? Do you find hobbies and interests can also feel like demands? Do you feel anxiety when pressured to do something, even if it's easy? Do you feel automatically driven to behave like a different person when you're in a public setting? Do you make up new words for things or deliberately mispronounce words? Yes. Do you feel pressured to do things immediately when asked? Do you like to do the same thing over and over until it becomes boring and then move on to something new? That's ADHD. Do you feel panicked if someone deviates from a plan or instruction that you've set them? Did you hate being made to stand out as a child? Do you strongly dislike being criticised, yet are quite critical of others? Do you often question rules, regulations, or laws? Have you been described as manipulative? Are you competitive? Have you been described as controlling? Do you daydream rich, imaginative worlds? Do you use role play to cope with tasks or social situations? Do tasks cause you so much anxiety it's felt impossible to start them at all? Do you feel constrained by obligations such as having to smile or say please or thank you? Do you struggle to admit having done something wrong? Do you consciously use charm to negotiate situations? Does it anger you when a task requires more time or energy than you expected? And do you start tasks or projects in secret because telling people creates more demand and makes it harder to complete? Look, check out the links and look into all of this if it sounds like something you relate to. I'm still genuinely torn on this. A lot of this is arguably just common or garden neurodivergent executive dysfunction demand avoidance. A lot of this does seem to be how co-occurring autism and ADHD can crash into each other and create contradictions. But equally, there are some quite unique aspects to PDA that aren't covered off by other explanations. And a year and a bit on for me, looking back at all my notes, there is definitely something here. And like I've said, PDAers are adamant this is its own unique neurodivergent ecosystem. And also, like I said, to this day, some of the online content I can most relate to comes from PDAers like Christy Forbes, who's great, the Adult PDA Support Network, and a lot of the info on pages like the PDA Society, which again I'll link to. It's going to be a busy link page in the description. PDA Society has a page on self-help, coping strategies and therapies for adult PDAers. It's genuinely helpful for neurodivergent demand avoidance, whether you officially have a PDA profile or not. There's loads of stuff you can cherry pick, even if you feel you don't fully fit a PDA profile. The kind of broad settings on the PDA Society website are recognizing demands, recognizing avoidance, identifying and understanding PDA, self-acceptance, understanding masking, finding your tribe, managing, reducing and disguising demands, being aware of your triggers, sensory regulation, having demand-free time, exploring different ways of working, informing others and asking for accommodations, maintaining relationships, and therapy, counselling, mindfulness and meditation. There's some stuff on workplace adjustments for PDA profiles on the PDA Society site too, many of which are broadly similar to general autism adjustments, to be honest, which I talked about already in chapter 16. Things like flexi time, regular breaks, mentoring, but with a few kind of opposite things to those standard adjustments as well, like indirect requests made politely that sound less like rigid demands can be more effective. Like, this aspect definitely isn't me. I much prefer clear instructions. Like, ambiguity drives me nuts, which then bounces me out and makes me think a PDA profile probably isn't me. Anyway, the main reason I didn't keep going down the PDA rabbit hole, which briefly captivated my attention, and I'm jumping ahead a couple of weeks in the chronology, is that I ultimately went for a consultation with a PDA specialist who said, while I had a lot of demand avoidant traits, they weren't convinced I met enough of them to qualify for a slam dunk PDA autism profile. But, and this was the kind of crucial pivot point for me in my particular neurodivergent discovery year, they said they were 100% convinced there was something else going on with me in addition to my autism, and while they couldn't give a clinical diagnosis, they were pretty certain I had co-occurring ADHD. And that certainty sent me off down that rabbit hole, which ultimately led to another diagnosis of ADHD alongside my autism. So that's my brief-ish but glorious PDA journey. Thought I had it, probably don't have it, opened the door to co-occurring ADHD. Yeah, I'll wind it up at that. I hope this was useful, particularly to anyone who's still relatively new on their neurodivergent self-discovery voyage and maybe wasn't familiar with PDA yet. Do check out some of the links I'll stick in the description to this video, and enjoy exploring. The online PDA community is one of the most supportive ones out there, and even though I probably don't have a PDA profile myself, there's a lot of valuable tips and hacks and self-care that will work for PDA adjacent autistic and neurodivergent folk as well. There's so much crossover between all of this, and it's all love and it's all good. Just enjoy exploring all these aspects. Take what rings true for you and add it to your self-care bank until you find the slot that's just right for you. Cheers. Have a great week. Like, subscribe to the channel, click the drop down for notifications, and see you next Sunday. Cheers.